Our text for today consists of only one verse, but what a verse. Romans chapter 5, verse 8. But God demonstrates His own love toward us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's so good, I got to read it again. But God demonstrates His own love toward us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. The well-known British poet named Elizabeth Barrett Browning was famous for her many love poems and love sonnets. But now, if you're like me, out of all the many words about love she ever wrote, you remember only 10 of her words. And you're probably not remembering them at this moment. But let me jog your memory. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. You've heard that, read that. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. And then following that, Miss Browning went on to list many, many ways in which to love people. But in her long list, and I checked out the sonnet, she left out what I think is the most important way of all to love. And that is, she never said, I love you unconditionally. She never said, I love you no matter what. The most far-reaching and sometimes heart-wrenching question about love is not, do you love me? But do you love me no matter what? Do you love me no matter what I have or have not done? You see, folks, loving folks when folks are fine, that's not the true test of true love. No. Loving folks when folks aren't fine. Loving folks in the face of their sin, that's the true test of true love. That's unconditional love. And in just this one verse, Paul gives us a detailed description of God's unconditional love for us. You talk about a guy who could say a lot with a few words. Paul was a master at that. So let's look at what he has to say. First, he gives us the proof of God's unconditional love. He begins the verse by pointing to God's demonstration of His unconditional love. You see, God hasn't just talked about loving us. He hasn't just sung about loving us. He hasn't just written about loving us. And He hasn't just thought about loving us. No, God has demonstrated His love for us. He has applied it, put it into action, practiced it, put it into use, shown it to us for us to see, to have, and to know. So you see, folks, we don't have to wait or wonder or worry if God loves us or not. We know He does. He's proven it beyond any question or doubt, and we'll look at the way He proved it in a few moments. Second of all, we look at the personal aspect of His unconditional love. Paul notes next that God's love is His own love. Now, if anything is your own, you own it. It's yours. It's personal as personal gets. And this is God's love for us. It is His own love. It's not a borrowed or a loaned love. It's not a proxy love. It's not a substitutional or a replacement love. It's not a designated hitter or runner kind of love. It's not a stunt double love. It's not a look-alike love. No, God loves us with the love of none other than Himself, His very own love. And then thirdly, we note the people of God's unconditional love. Who does God love in this way? Paul says next, toward us. Now who's us? We are us. That word us includes everyone and excludes no one. That word us applies to every race and gender, every nationality, every location, every vocation, every economic level, every educational level, every age and phase and stage of life. Thank God He loves us. Thank God He doesn't just love most of us, or many of us, or much of us, or a majority of us. Thank God He doesn't just love a bunch of us, or a lot of us, a heap of us, or a passel of us. No, He loves us, all of us. And then we come to the period of God's unconditional love. Now, all of this is amazing. But to me, this is the most amazing one of all. Look at the period, the time, the when of His love. While we were still sinners. Friends, God did not start loving us when we stopped sinning. God did not begin to love us when we began to be good little boys and girls. God did not wait for us to straighten up and fly right before He kicked in His love for us. If that was the case, He would never love us, now would He? I remember years ago trying to lead a man to Christ, and this was his stumbling block. He told me that, Brother Mike, I've got to quit all the bad things I'm doing in order for God to love me. He had the cart before the horse. Now, yes, he needed to quit all the bad things he was doing. And yes, God hated his sin. But no, God was not waiting for him to give up his bad things to start loving him. And I tried to get him to see that God's love is the horse that pulls the cart. I couldn't get through to him. I hope and pray that in the years since somebody has. But you see what I'm saying? The period of his love. How remarkable. And then we note the person of God's unconditional love. Who is this person that God gives us his love through? Paul says he is Christ. Christ. God does not show us his love through one of his angels up in heaven. God does not show us his love through one of his Old Testament prophets. God doesn't show us his love through one of his New Testament disciples. No. He loves us through his Son, his very Son, his only Son, Jesus Christ. God loves us through the love of his life. God loves us through the one that's nearest and dearest to him. God loves us through the one who has been with him throughout all of eternity. In the classroom through which God's love comes to us, there's only one desk. And sitting at that desk is God's own Son, Jesus Christ. And then we check out the price of God's unconditional love. What was the price? Christ died for us. The price tag of God's love for us is death. The death of his very Son, Jesus Christ. This, of course, is the highest price and the ultimate cost of God's love for us. Now, his love is free to us, but his love for us cost him his everything, his all. God, if you will, emptied his wallet and emptied his vault when he gave Jesus to die for us. God broke and busted up his own heart when he gave Jesus to die for us. The price for God to love us is the death of his Son Jesus. And because he loves us so, he paid even that price. Now you add those 6 words up, and you get 2 words. Unconditional love. The love of God has no strings attached. The love of God has no fine print at the bottom of the page or at the bottom of the screen. The love of God has no exceptions or exclusions. The love of God has no hidden clauses, provisions, or amendments. The love of God has no ifs, ands, buts, or maybes. The love of God has no restraints or restrictions, no limitations or stipulations, no borders or boundaries. No. If God were to write a love poem or a love sonnet, he would write, "How do I love thee?" And he wouldn't answer that with a long list. No. He'd answer it with one word. Unconditionally. Unconditionally. A couple of weeks ago, as we neared the end of our Awana session on Wednesday night, I'm sitting here on the front pew right across from the cross. And one of Miss Natalie's cubbies came and sat down beside me. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Cubbies, they're not Chicago Cub fans, okay? I'm working on them, trying to get on the route to the Cardinals. But no, the Cubbies are our youngest crew, okay? Our youngest preschoolers. And this little fella, he slides up beside me, and he gets looking at the cross, and he starts pumping me with questions. And he asked me about what was that up on top of the cross. And I explained that to him on a cubby level. And then he asked me about that cloth and the color of it. And I explained that to him on a cubby level. And then he asked me about those nails. And I explained that to him on a cubby level. And then he asked me about those red spots. And I explained that to him on the cubby level. And then, folks, the little fellow looked up at me and said, "Brother Mike, did you kill Jesus?" Now that'll get your attention, folks. From the mouths of babes, did you kill Jesus? What would you have said? Well, I told him the truth on a cubby level. I said, yes. Yes, with my sins, I killed Jesus. Now here's why I tell you that. Here I am, with my sins, I killed and murdered God's only Son. And he still loves me. He still loves me. And you know what? Same is true for you. You were there with me that day, killing and murdering God's only Son, and yet God still loves you. Now that, my friends, is unconditional love. And that's the love of our God. What a God. What a love. Unconditional love.